Days from arguably the most consequential New York City election in decades. We've already spoken to a number of the Democratic mayoral primary candidates, and another major contender, New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer, is in the building. Also on set with us, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and president of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton, and political strategist and an MSNBC political analyst, Susan Del Percio, joins us.
So, Scott Stringer, tell me about your housing plan.
I thought you'd never ask.
Tell me about your housing plan.
Well, he's actually asking.
Well, this is great. First, it's great to be here, but right now in New York City, we're going to have to tackle homelessness for real this time.
Right.
And we're going to have to build housing, low-income housing for people, because 30% of the people in homeless shelters are actually people who work. They go to jobs, but they can't find an apartment. So I want to take all the vacant land that the city owns, give that land to the people, give that land to not-for-profit organizations, not to the billionaire developers, and actually build the housing that we need for the poorest people in the city, because we can't bring back our city if we don't include everybody. And that's what's been missing in the last 8 years.
I talk to my friends in New York, and I hear two things over and over again as we've moved through COVID. But even before COVID, I heard about homelessness, that it's gone up more than people have seen in many years. And of course, after COVID, crime. So are those really the two top issues, homelessness and crime, for a lot of New Yorkers?
We definitely hear about crime. We hear definitely about homelessness, but we also are thinking about how we're going to educate our children and bring them back to school. And we have to bring them back differently, because they're going to need tutoring, mental health counseling. So it's not just those issues. We really have to bring the city back. This is going to be our greatest comeback. And we have to hit all the pieces of this, which goes to housing and homelessness, but also education for children.
So how are you looking at, we're looking at these crime spikes in New York City. How are you looking at policing? Over the last year or so, there's been a move to change policing somehow. Some people have called, I know you haven't, but to defund the police. What does a good New York Police Department look like to you?
A good New York Police Department is solving the crime. We in New York City have the lowest clearance rates we've had in a very long time. We're only solving 26% of the violent crime. So we're not going into communities with sound approaches, with more senior police officers. We've got to go find the shooters. But at the same time, we don't need to over-police in black and brown communities. And we don't have to go into neighborhoods and have police respond to mental health issues or wellness issues. This is outdated. This is not the model. And when I'm mayor, we're going to make sure that we fight the violent crime, but at the same time, we're going to invest in violence interrupter programs, keep kids away from the criminal justice system. When I was a state assembly member many years ago, I remember building prisons in upstate New York. These were Republicans who wanted to build prisons, not to reduce crime, but to create economic activity in upstate New York, building prisons. I believe, that you got to keep kids away from the criminal justice system. And we can do both. And we can direct funding to invest in our kids. Look, when the pandemic came, you know what City Hall said? They said, let's cut summer jobs for kids. Why would you do that? Because the kids are the future. And if we don't give them what they need, education, jobs, then they end up part of the correctional institutions.
What's your position on bail reform? That's when you talk to New York City police officers, when you talk to the commissioner, they say that is a big problem with these crime statistics, is that it's a revolving door. With no cash bail, they can't hold somebody who's committed their 10th or 20th or 30th crime. Do you think we should reinstate cash bail?
So I'm the controller. I deal with data. The data, that's not the true data. The police commissioner is wrong, and he's not coming clean on this. There is already judicial discretion in the bail legislation. That's not what's driving crime. We have a national epidemic because of the pandemic.
So New Yorkers that tell me that, they're wrong too? Because I hear this all the time from New Yorkers, that it's a revolving door, that one crime after another crime after another crime is committed, they get sent to jail, they come right out, and continue committing crimes.
It's not what the data suggests. And sometimes if you want to be mayor of New York, you have to speak directly and honestly about what's going on. We have a police force that's not solving the violent crime. We have to change that. Part of what we have to do is look at the police bureaucracy at the very high levels of the NYPD. We've seen the bureaucracy grow by 76%, a $300 million ballooning of the budget, less money for the precincts, less money to invest in our kids, and we need a mayor with a fresh approach.
So do you think that the crimes, the explosion in crime is the cops' fault? You think it's the police bureaucracy's fault?
I think it's at the door of the mayor, and the next mayor is going to have to come in and work to ensure the safety on the streets, but also not to go back to the Giuliani-style era of policing, stop and frisk, and all the things that Reverend Sharpton and others said was over-policing the black and brown communities that left scars. We have to have a measured response.
I remember reading articles. I think it was in the fall, where people in sort of the nicer parts of Brooklyn, the tonier parts of Brooklyn, were talking about defunding police, and then they talked to representatives that represented people of color, black and brown communities, and said, "We need more police. We need more police in our schools. We need more police on our streets." Who do you listen to? The people who live in Park Slope, or the people who live in the areas who need the police to protect their kids?
First of all, no one is suggesting that we don't need police, and the people who say that we don't need police to stop crime are kidding themselves. And there may be mayoral candidates who believe that. I don't.
You think they're being insensitive to people of color who actually are saying our children are in danger when they walk to school every morning?
I'm hearing two things. People want the guns off the streets, and we have to make sure that happens. People want to feel safe. We have to make sure that happens. But there are people of color, and again, I come from not trying to speak for communities of color. That's not what I do. But I know very much that there are a lot of grandmothers, a lot of parents who worry about their black son, even to this day in New York City. Right. Why can't we do two things at the same time? Yeah. Why can't we invest in kids and keep the streets safe? And by the way, I grew up in New York City in the 1970s in a place called Washington Heights. Mm-hmm. There were 2,000 murders a year. I remember when my mother would say, when you get in the train, sit with the conductor. So you had 80 kids sitting in the conductor car. Remember that? Right? And the good news is we don't talk that way anymore. Right. So I'm not going to take our city back to those days. I have two little kids. They're not going back to those days.
It sounds, just quickly, sorry, Rev, that you don't have a lot of confidence in the way the police department's being run. Would you suggest a change at the top and Commissioner Shea?
I'm going to bring in a commissioner who's aligned with my values and strategies if I'm elected mayor, absolutely.
And that's not him?
It will not be Mr. Shea. He's the de Blasio appointee. I do think we need to clean house and set a new course because we do have an increase in shootings, and we also need a mayor who's going to have a full public safety agenda. This is not easy. It's easy to scream about crime or to throw up your hands and act like Rudy Giuliani did in the 90s, but this is a different era right now. We have got to get this right.
As we deal with the issue of crime and policing, and I think the relocating of the homeless is going to be an issue. Just today, we're seeing where they have instructed the courts saying that the hotel on 79th Street had to relocate people back to where shelter, which could be an interaction with policing. We have to thread the needle of how you protect people, which you're correct. People want crime down, and in our communities, black and brown and Asian, Latino is at its highest. Or is becoming higher, but at the same time deal with policing where it is not a license to go back to the stop and frisk of the Giuliani days. How do you thread that needle? Because I know you were one of the first people with a large political profile that came out and agreed with us on stop and frisk. But how do you thread that needle where we deal with the gun violence, deal with trying to bring crime down, but don't do it where the police go overboard, that we have that balance?
So the balance is, let's look at the hotspots in the city. They've existed, by the way, for more than a decade. And let's go in with more senior police officers. Let's beef up the homicide bureaus. Let's up the clearance rates, because the only way we're going to deal with crime is you got to go in and solve the crime. We're at an all-time low, 26%. That's crazy. But as you know, that's 50% of the job. We have got to keep kids away from the criminal justice system, and the way to do that is enact the programs that work, the violence interrupter programs. They're in 17 out of 77 precincts. Scale it up, and then let's also look at the 911 calls that come in. 40% of 911 calls are not for crime. They're for mental health issues or wellness issues. Why are we sending police officers tying up their time and not sending the health professionals. They're doing this in Oregon, called the Cahoots program. People have mental health professionals respond to mental health calls. That already takes police out of the communities because we don't want them over-policing. And this is the future of what our city can look like.
Scott, the other day at the debate, none of the candidates except for Andrew Yang wanted Mayor de Blasio's endorsement. You also were one of the people who gave him his administration an F for his tenure. If you're going to be mayor and you take office on January 1st, and you say you're the one with all the experience, so I want specifics here. I mean, hardcore specifics. Numbers, or actions. What do you do on day one, and as far as addressing the homeless crisis and how that conflate also deals with crime specifically? And don't say build better housing for just the homeless, because that's going to take years to do. So what do you do? How do you rally your police commissioner? What do you say to the people out there? What are you going to do that day?
Well, first of all, I know the main guy is coming on the show, so I just want to say when Bill de Blasio comes on national TV, I got to have his back. So
I thought you were talking about us.
No, right here.
All right, but still, you still have to do something.
The Rev's here. He's the main guy.
I'm trying to be nice,
You just lost a lot.
There I go. But let's get specifics, because the homeless crisis right now, we're going to have, we had last night 60,000 people sleeping in homeless shelters. Half of them are children. And the way I would deal with this specifically is I would take the 30% of the people who are working. They have jobs, Susan. They go to shelters to sleep. And I would move them into the...
Can you do that on day one?
You could build the program on day one and scale it up. I think we can do 10,000 supportive housing units a year. I have a plan to specifically do that.